Well, welcome to the Church Office podcast.
My name's Gavin Smith, and if you're joining us on video, then here's a little wave.
We're excited to have Nigel Ring join us.
I've never actually heard the word wicked and accountant put in the same sentence.
Moving on for the last two questions, Nigel, relating to finance, and I know we're in a season now where it's particularly challenging for individuals with the cost of living rise. It's just crazy, isn't it? People, what they're paying for their gas, electricity, challenges that might be happening. And so when you kind of understand your members and you're talking about church finances, this is a challenging topic. So I'm hoping to, we've been in seasons like this before, haven't we? And I'm sure you're going to have some wisdom here. So the questions come in is, what advice do you have for churches who face financial challenges over the next few months and years, and maybe some practical points that they can consider?
This is a hugely challenging topic, and we do need to unpack it. Yeah. Let's interact to do so. Strangely, I would say start with budgeting.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've travelled a lot overseas, as I think you know, and I've talked about things like budgeting in Africa, and their response has often been, but we haven't got any money.
Yeah.
And I've said, no, but that's why it's so important to budget.
Yeah.
So when you get some money, you know what the priority is because you've already decided in advance, this is what we're going for.
Yes.
And I think we're in a season within the church like that now because of COVID and the current crisis and so on, where maybe the giving anyhow is going down because some people left with COVID and didn't come back afterwards and so on. And now we've hit huge inflation in the UK, and I don't know how widely this podcast goes, but it's fairly worldwide.
Yeah.
And so, there is less money to achieve what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
I think it's a chance to review what we're doing and how we're doing it. Almost get a fresh commission from God that we should be serving in these areas. I'm very mindful of that famous quote of Hudson Taylor's, which I probably won't get word perfect, but something like God's work done in God's way will never lack God's supply.
Yeah,
and Hudson Taylor never appealed for money, nor did George Muller. And yet he built 5 or even 6 huge orphanages in Bristol, and God always provided
what they needed.
So let's not be so practically orientated that we forget we're in faith. We're a people of faith.
Yeah.
So I would say a budget is a helpful thing to have.
Oh, definitely.
And that it should be vision driven.
Yes.
It shouldn't be about only practical matters. I would say, just talking, I don't know if any trustees would be listening to this, but I would say the trustee body has a huge role, if conducted in the right way, in serving the leadership of the church in this area of finance. And trustees and elders, I think, should be very much one team with different expertise. They should never be conflicting. And sometimes, and you've done a podcast on this, sometimes you find eldership teams and trustee bodies at each other's throats. I mean, that is so unglorifying to God. But the trustees can have a very useful role to play because they tend to be people who are in the world, as it were, more than perhaps the spiritual leadership of the church is.
Yeah, that's good.
It's sensitive to what's going on. And I see the role of trustees, and I've chaired trustee bodies for many, many years. I see the role of trustees first, making sure that all the finances are well in order. And that the elders, if it's an eldership-led church, that the elders are fully in the picture about what the situation is with finances and how the consequences of any decision they may be making, what the consequences are, and whether the finances are there to do it. And I won't accept the little phrase, oh, we're in faith for that. I will dig. Because sometimes we're in faith is actually saying, well, we don't know how to solve this problem, but I'm optimistic.
It is. Yes.
And that for me is not good. If you're in faith, you need to tell me in what way you're in faith, how God has spoken to you to allow you to say that. Once I'm satisfied as a trustee that the decision-making leadership understand the financial consequences of a decision they're making, I'm then very happy to come alongside them and with them to be on my knees praying, God, will you provide? Which is where the faith is exercised. But be sure you know the facts first. So we're in a situation of recession, of crisis, or whatever you like to call it. How do we handle it now? I would say review all that you're involved in. Obviously, trim the budget where you can do so.
Yes.
But try to identify what the essence of the ministry is and what the peripheral matters are. And don't lose the essence. The church needs to be strong and available at this time, not in survival mode. You know, for the world to be able to come to the church, they say, yes, so welcome. We know how difficult it is out there. You're in a safe space here. You know, that they should be able to come to the church with that attitude is brilliant. I'm encouraging our own church, and I know others are as well, to try and begin creating a pot for people who can't pay their electricity bill and so on. Let's help people to walk through the practice of life. And, you know, it may be that we take a special offering. I don't know, we haven't decided yet. But we'll take a special offering because there are one or two people in the church for whom the crisis is going to be an inconvenience, but it's not a serious financial impact. Their earnings are such
they're going to
that
be
it's not going to be a problem. So maybe we take a special gift day, a love offering that we can set aside to help people who, again, very definitely feel the challenges that are going on now. So, you know, I think these are things, approaches, but do you want to come back to me on any of this?
No, I think they're good. I think I like your point about budgeting, because I do meet lots of churches who haven't in previous years had to budget because they've always had funds there. And so I think budgeting exercise, I think a review of that is really, really helpful. I think for a church administrator, the advice you're giving there about, you know, I can sometimes feel the responsibility as I'm the kind of final stamp that says, yes, we can afford this. But actually, I like you kind of reposition it and say, actually, let me make sure you have all the facts. And then I'll stand with you if that's a decision that you make. And I think sometimes just I can feel the responsibility, but actually saying, maybe actually I need to kind of share that responsibility, or actually not take responsibility for it.
I was going to say, ultimately, it's not your responsibility.
It is a trustee.
You are serving the elders and, in the legal framework, the trustees.
Absolutely right.
You shouldn't be carrying the weight of that responsibility. You'll be alert to it. But what you do with it, you then say, look, to your leader or something or other, you just need to know that. You know, we haven't got any money next month.
That's right.
That you won't get paid. But that'll make people But you shouldn't feel the weight of that responsibility unless you are also an elder, in which case you should.
Then you are.
But you know, but
it's
ultimately
important to recognise that, isn't it?
But it's easy for the leadership of the church to say, well, Gavin's so good at this, we'll let him get on with it. And with that comes an implied level of responsibility that is beyond really why you're serving in this way.
And this is really helpful because, you know, the next question someone's asked is how do we work through the tension of faith and finances, which is really what we are talking about here. Because these two questions do come together, isn't it? We have to have this recognition that times are tough for people, and so an awareness that actually we need to recognise that people are going to maybe find it more difficult to give in the same way that they could have done before. People's circumstances are changing with job losses or retirement, and all those things affect everything. So these things are good, and awareness is really, really important. But also, our guys here have also just done 3 weeks teaching on giving, and have kind of decided to say, actually, you know, some people are looking and saying, that's brave, isn't it? Just why would you be talking about giving now at this point, you know? But that tension goes on, doesn't it? Saying, actually, we want to talk about this because we want people to trust God, and we know God supplies all of our needs. And how do we remind people of that grace and that peace that can come because of all that Christ has done? He will meet our needs. And so how do we give generously, and how do we give even in generously in the midst of this context? So there are there's lots of this. This really is a big question at the minute. I think I'm getting to.
And I think there are times as well where it's not even necessarily about money.
Yeah.
What does money do? Money facilitates activity.
Yeah.
It may be that sometimes the activity can happen without the money. Because there's someone in the church who's gifted.
Yes.
We needn't employ this person to do that job or whatever.
Yes.
There are other ways. Yeah. I'm interested in that quote that I brought for Hudson Taylor's. It was God will supply all your needs. It wasn't God will give you all the money you need.
To build the ministry that you want. Yeah, that's right.
The supplying needs can be bringing people resources and so on to get things done. Yeah. Rather than saying it has to be money so you can buy that.
Yeah,
in
absolutely
way.
Right. Yeah, and I think I used a word with a pastor the other day. I said, I love creative budgeting, and he said to me, that just sounds really dodgy, but it's not. It's actually saying, how can we steward that we've got? How can we be creative in finding ways that we can continue ministry or continue it in a slightly different way that actually, recognizes that everything that we've been given here, we need to steward well, we need to use it well. And I love the fact that you're putting together kind of a contingency pot for people that can serve people in the church who are going to really face difficulties and outside the church as well. And I definitely encourage churches to think about that as part of their budget. Really useful.
And the scripture says God loves a cheerful giver. And I think that's true of the church as well. That, if the church is generous.
Yes.
I mean, I've been in churches in Brighton for a long time, and we would, I'm not saying very frequently, but we would on occasion give to another church because the ministry they were doing, they needed money and we weren't doing it. Yeah. And so let's get behind them and just honour them and bless them to get on and do it.
Yeah.
So I think that if we can see church in that sort of way, that it's a kind of a facilitating community.
Yeah.
And it may be that others come to us and say, look, you seem to have a lot of students who are very poor at the moment. Yeah. Maybe we can give you £100 for each student or something.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. But I think
that's thinking on the top of the head. That's not happening. It's,
if you're a student out there thinking, great, I might get £100 here. It's true. Yeah, it's good. But I do think having conversations with trustees and elders or PCCs and key leaders, getting the facts, finding out where we're at. If you're a pastor listening to this, you might need to take a greater interest in the finances in this season than you might have had before. You may need to ask questions about things, in a slightly different way. You may not be able to bring your 100th idea to the table and see it work through because of the season that we're in. And actually, I think there's that working together, praying together, and saying, let's trust God together all on this point. We want to bring in a children's ministry worker. Let's trust God that the finances will come through for that. And we can stand and do that together. Where there are other things you say, well, actually, we can't feed the church this week like we might normally do, but we're going to draw that back. So some wisdom in just taking the time, I guess, which is the important thing here, isn't it? Take the time to review these things and to consider these things and make a plan from there.
And obviously to just look at what you're doing and say, well, are there things we needn't do or we can do more efficiently or in different ways, just being responsible in terms of the kind of the housekeeping of the church as well.
Yeah.
And stewarding things well. Can I just say a word just more about having mentioned trustees, and I know that you've done a podcast on it, but just to say trustees need to be spiritual people.
Yes.
I have sadly seen too many cases where trustees have been appointed because of their gifting and worldly experience,
their business or something like
but they're not spiritual people. And they come from a different decision-making framework and can cause real mayhem in the church. So in appointing trustees, I urge any leaders who are listening to this podcast to start with the spiritual before the gifting.
And the character as well.
And character
exactly right.
and all that side.
I think that really does. It will help reduce the conflict, and in that sense, I think you're absolutely right. Take your time in choosing people and make it work. Really, really helpful. Anything else to add on that finance one?
I don't think so. No, one could obviously talk about some of the minutiae, but I think that's probably all I have to say.
Yeah. So if you haven't got a church budget, then take time to spend some time reviewing. Get people together talking about this, and
alongside that as well, I'm surprised how often churches do not do a monthly management review of the finances, management accounts, you might call them. And just very simply, what has been the expenditure next door to a column of what was the budget? Both on the income and expenditure side, and be rigorous in reviewing that.
Yeah, absolutely right.
So that you know when something's gone wrong. It's much easier to change course as soon as you see you've gone slightly off course than when you realise you're miles off course and try to pull it back.
Absolutely right.
And you need to do that on a monthly basis.
That's really helpful. That's really helpful. Thank you so much